In psychology. Yes, I did get a haircut yesterday. I thought I was starting to look too much like a cartoon character, so I got a haircut. So throughout the semester, you're going to watch my hair grow out and get frizzed up. It's raining today, so it's kind of sticks out all over the place. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 4, Theories in Psychology. Not a whole lot. Let's see how quickly we can get through this. See if we can make it make sense. A phenomenon, plural of phenomenon, of course, is phenomena, is a general result that has been observed reliably and systematically empirical research. In essence, it is established answer to a research question, and there are lots of them. These are examples of phenomena. Blind sight, people with damage to their visual cortex are often able to respond to visual stimuli that they do not consciously see. That's known as blind sight. If you look at social psychology, you know what bystander effect is. The more people that are present in an emergency situation, the less likely that anyone will help. The Dunning-Kruger effect is where people tend to overestimate their skills in a variety of areas, and it is the least skilled people who overestimate the most. Fundamental attribution error, people tend to explain others' behavior in terms, these are all phenomena, in terms of their personal characteristics as opposed to the situation that they're in, and that's the fundamental attribution error. McGurk effect, when audio of a basic speech sound is combined with video of a person making mouth movements for a different speech sound, people often perceive a sound that is intermediate between the two. That's known as the McGurk effect. As a matter of fact, I was just watching an AI generated Taylor Swift song today, and it was theoretically her singing. Of course, the lip movements didn't didn't quite fit what she was saying, but you wanted them to. So we got the McGurk effect. Own race effect. People recognize faces of their own race more accurately than faces of people of other races. This is also called the other race effect and the cross race effect. And this is one of the reasons why when white people see an African American who commits a crime, then they have a hard time identifying that individual. When an African American individual sees a white person commit a crime, they have a difficult time identifying the individual as well. The curious thing is that when white people don't really look at skin tone, they look at hair. As weird as that is. And African Americans, why would they look at hair? It's very similar. What they look at is skin tone, and that's one of the reasons why there is such a difficulty in identifying each other, as strange as that is. Mere exposure effect, or the placebo effect. Placebos, fake psychological or medical treatments, often lead to improvements in people's symptoms and functioning. The mere exposure effect, the more often people have been exposed to a stimulus, the more they like it, even when the stimulus is presented subliminally. And this is known as the mere exposure effect. Was it in this class that I put a song? No, it was in the other class. Serial position effect, stimuli presented near the beginning and the end of a list are remembered better than stimuli presented in the middle, and that's known as a serial position effect. And spontaneous recovery, a conditioned response that has been extinguished, often returns with no further training after the passage of time, and that's known as spontaneous recovery. Although an empirical result might be referred to as a phenomenon, after being observed only once, this term is only likely to be used for results that have been replicated. Replication means conducting a study again, either exactly as it was originally conducted or with modifications to see if it produces the same results. And this is really kind of interesting because when I was doing my dissertation, the head of the IRB, um, we we were having a disagreement as to whether I should be looking at resilience in American Indians. There was a couple different reasons. One was political. They were trying to they wanted to make sure that I didn't say anything too positive. Otherwise, it would cut the funding for a lot of programs. At least that was the theory. The other thing was that my research had never been done before, and she said, "How can you do that? You don't know what results you're going to get." And I said, "That's why I need to do the research." And turned out that she didn't really understand how that worked. She wanted me to do research that had already been done, similar, and she wanted me to replicate something. And the reason she did is because that's how she got her PhD. She got her PhD because she replicated the individual that was her dissertation chair. She just replicated his research. So she just repeated his research, guided by him the whole way. And I was thinking, she called it fast tracking, is what she called it, as strange as that is. Individual researchers often replicate their own studies before publishing them, and that was actually what was going on. He had done research, and she was replicating something that he had done. It was quick because she didn't have to really come up with anything, so she felt that she was being fast-tracked. Many empirical research reports include an initial study and then one or more follow-up studies that replicate the initial study with the minor modifications. Particularly interesting results often come to the attention of other researchers who go on to conduct their own replications. Sometimes a replication, this is actually supposed to move. Whoops, it's not moving. I'm not sure what I did to make it stop moving. Sometimes a replication study produces different results from the original study. This could mean that the results of the original study or the results of the replication were a fluke. They occurred by chance and do not reflect something that is generally true. In either case, additional replications would be likely to resolve this. A failure to produce the same results could also mean that the replication differed in some important way from the initial study. And of course, the idea is that if you only do replications, and this is what my IRB, the head of the IRB was trying to tell me. She was saying that I should be doing a replication, and I said, no, I want to do original research. And her idea was, no, I mean, nobody does original research, everybody does replications. And I said something brilliant like, well, if nobody did original research, we wouldn't go anywhere. And she kind of nodded her head and said, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. In other words, I wasn't supposed to come up with something original. That could only happen at large universities and whatnot. Really silly stuff. We didn't get along. She eventually fired me anyway, so everybody was happy. A theory is my voice is. It's like I said. It's a rainy day today, so my hair's all flying all over the place, and that's why I have a little congestion going. A theory, and not only that, but we're way up north, fairly close to the Canadian border, about 200 miles from the Canadian border, and we got all that smoke coming down from the wildfires in Canada. So it's kind of an interesting summer so far. The sun was orange this morning when it came out. A theory is a coherent explanation or interpretation of one or more phenomena. Although theories can take a variety of forms, one thing that they have in common is that they go beyond the phenomena they explain by including variables, structures, processes, functions, or organizing principles that have not been observed directly. Outside of science, referring to an idea as a theory often implies that it is untested, perhaps no more than a wild guess. In science, the term theory has no such implication. A theory is simply an explanation or interpretation of a set of phenomena. It can be untested, but it can also be extensively tested, well supported, and accepted as an accurate description of the world by the scientific community. In addition to theory, researchers in psychology use several related terms to refer to their explanations and interpretations of phenomena. A perspective is a broad approach, more general than a theory, to explaining and interpreting phenomena. A model is a precise explanation or interpretation of a specific phenomenon, often expressed in terms of equations, computer programs, or biological structures and processes. A hypothesis can be an explanation that relies on just a few key concepts, although this term more commonly refers to a prediction about a new phenomenon based on a theory, hypothesis. Adding to the confusion is the fact that researchers often use these terms interchangeably. Keep in mind, however, that the most important distinction remains that between observations and interpretations. Okay, so it all depends on who you're talking to. Scientific theories are meant to provide accurate explanations or interpretations of phenomena. Consider that a theory can be accurate without being very useful. Consider that a theory can be useful without being entirely accurate. Theories have purposes other than simply providing accurate explanations or interpretations. Three additional purposes of theories: the organization of known phenomena, the prediction of outcomes in new situations, the generation of new research. One important purpose of scientific theories is to organize phenomena in ways that help people think about them clearly and efficiently. Thus, theories are good or useful to the extent that they organize more phenomena from greater clarity and efficiency. Scientists generally follow the principle of parsimony, which holds that a theory should include only as many concepts as are necessary to explain or interpret the phenomena of interest. Simpler, more parsimonious theories organize phenomena more efficiently than more complex, less parsimonious theories. Okay, so this is a joke, and this joke explains to you what Occam's razor means. Occam's razor says, and Occam was a Turkish philosopher and scientist. Occam said that Occam's razor is that the simplest explanation is always the right explanation. And he says, I'll have an Occam's cocktail. What he's talking about is take out all the extraneous things. The simplest thing would be just to order whiskey. And he's a scientist, of course, so he says, give me Occam's cocktail, which is, of course, just a whiskey. And that's what parsimony means. The simplest is the best, is usually the correct answer. People can bury you in BS. You've heard that term, I'm sure. But the reality is, you can always yell out back at them, Occam's razor, dude, or parsimony, dude. You can always say that, and that tells them, stop with the BS. I can handle this. I can handle it. A second purpose of theories is to allow researchers and others to make predictions about what will happen in new situations. In clinical psychology, treatment decisions are often guided by theories. The prevailing scientific theory of dissociative identity disorder is that people develop multiple personalities, also called alters, because they are familiar with this idea from popular portrayals, such as the movie Sybil. And because they are unintentionally encouraged to do so by their clinicians by asking to meet an alter. And of course, that's what he has said. I want to meet an alter, so you manufacture This theory implies that rather than encouraging patients to act out multiple personalities, treatment should involve discouraging them from doing this. And of course, that's a second purpose. A third purpose of theories is to generate new research by raising new questions. Consider the theory that people engage in self-injurious behavior, such as cutting, because it reduces negative emotions such as sadness, anxiety, and anger. This theory immediately suggests several new interesting questions. Is there a statistical relationship between cutting and the amount of negative emotions experienced? Is it causal? If so, what is it about cutting that has this effect? Is it the pain, the site of the injury, or something else? Does cutting affect all negative emotions equally? Notice that a theory does not have to be accurate to serve this purpose. Even an inaccurate theory can generate new and interesting research questions. Of course, if the theory is inaccurate, the answers to the new questions will tend to be inconsistent with the theory. This will lead researchers to reevaluate the theory and either revise it or abandon it for a new one. And this is how scientific theories become more detailed and accurate over time. Researchers are usually considering multiple theories for any set of phenomena. One reason is that because human behavior is extremely complex, it is always possible to look at it from different perspectives. A second reason is that even from the same perspective, there are usually different ways to go beyond the phenomena of interest. Different theories of the same set of phenomena can be complementary, with each one supplying one piece of a larger puzzle. But different theories of the same phenomena can also be competing in the sense that if one is accurate, the other is probably not. Scientists are continually comparing theories in terms of their ability to organize phenomena, predict outcomes in new situations, and generate research. Those that fare poorly are assumed to be less accurate and are abandoned, while those that fare well are assumed to be more accurate and are retained and compared with newer and hopefully better theories. Although scientists generally do not believe that their theories ever provide perfectly accurate descriptions of the world, they do assume that this process produces theories that come closer and closer to the ideal. Now, the reality is that things are constantly changing. The world is constantly evolving. So your phenomena is constantly evolving as well. And so if your theories don't take in the change, then your theories are going to get stuck at a point. And that's really what we're looking at when we're looking at theories. Freud's theory, Maslow's theory of his hierarchy of needs. What's the new theory? And this is actually a question I asked the abnormal psychology class. I asked them, well, what's going to happen in the future with everything that's happening right now, with all this communication taking place and all the miscommunication taking place? What kind of mental health problems are we going to be seeing in the future that we don't see today? I mean, we didn't anticipate social media addiction. We didn't anticipate gaming addiction. So what in the world are we looking at? What's going to happen in the future? We're already catching ourselves being drawn in to people just continually lying. So what's going to happen in the future? What's mental health going to look like? That's an interesting question. We didn't have this problem back in the 1980s. We didn't have this problem back in the 1970s or 60s. So if we didn't have it back then, we don't have the theory today to cover that. But somebody's got to do it. And the problem is, do we have anybody with the desire to go against his professors and come up with a new theory, with a new direction? And the answer is no, because we don't want to think. We don't want to think because we don't want people to tell us we're wrong. That's the problem. But you know, the only way of coming up with a good idea is if you put it out there and let people beat on it for a while. But you got to be willing to be wrong, and people aren't willing to be wrong. That's part of the problem. Psychological theories vary widely in their formality. The extent to which the components of the theory and the relationships among them are specified clearly and in detail. And one of the problems and this is a problem I have with textbooks. Textbooks are mostly really old, and their ideas in textbooks are really old. But there's a reason for that, because it takes time to print these things, and by the time they're printed, new ideas may have come along. And those new ideas will not be in your textbook. So we kind of repeat the same old stories over and over and over again. Excuse me. And there they are. There's all the old stories right there. Sorry about that. I wish we could teach you new stuff, but hey. And not everybody agrees on the new stuff. A lot of times we've got old professors like me who don't want any new stuff to come along. Why wouldn't we want that? We don't want that because we don't know that stuff. And we don't teach that stuff. We only teach the old stuff. My golly. At the informal end of this dimension are theories that consist of simple verbal descriptions of a few important components and relationships. At the more precise formal end of this dimension are theories that are expressed in terms of mathematical equations or computer programs. Theories in psychology vary widely in their scope, the number and diversity of the phenomena they explain or interpret. Many early psychological theories were extremely broad in that they attempted to interpret essentially all human behavior. Freud and his followers applied his theory not only to understanding psychological disorders, but also to slips of the tongue and other everyday errors, dreaming, sexuality, art, politics, even civilization itself. Now, the reality is, we can look at all of these things, and politics are constantly changing. The politics of Freud, Freud wrote most of his theories under a monarchy in Austria, and it was a fairly strict monarchy. And then the monarchy fell during World War I. And Freud's still writing, of course, and he survived the war. And he continued to write in the 1920s. But the politics that he saw in Austria and Hungary and Czechoslovakia, well, this was all new politics. But he was trying to explain the politics of the monarchy, because that's where his theory came from. You see how strange all these things are. A lot of what was going on in the 1950s and 1960s were anti-communist theories. So when you read humanism or you look at behaviorism is before that. Humanism or Maslow or any of these other individuals, they were looking at fascism versus communism versus democracy. Are there other types of politics? Well, there's social democracy, but anyway, yeah, I mean, all these things changed. When Freud was writing his theories, there were very few democracies in the world. After World War I, there were more democracies in the world. And then all of a sudden, we got this extreme type of politics, the fascism, communism gained strength. So we have these extreme politics that people are arguing about. And that's what the psychologists had to deal with. They had to deal with those politics as well, because this is how people are thinking. And that's exactly what psychology is. It's trying to figure out how and why people think the way that they do. Such theories have fallen out of favor in scientific psychology because They tend to be imprecise and difficult to test. And of course, we don't even think about arguing politics anymore. They have, as far as psychologists are concerned. They have not been particularly successful at organizing or predicting the range and complexity of human behavior at the level of detail that scientific researchers usually seek. And this is a problem because what we're looking at is the past. We can only look at the past. We can look at we can look at the present, but we can't look into the future. And what needs to happen? I mean, people are complaining. Oh, Freud had said that women had penis envy. Well, he may have been correct as far as women were concerned in 1880. Maybe they did have penis envy, but not anymore. So because of this idea that he had back in 1880, we're going, oh, Freud's full of bananas. Well, that idea was full of bananas, certainly, but there are a lot of things that he got right. But psychology has to be imprecise because sometimes they try to go too far. Okay. Contemporary theories in psychology can vary in their scope. At the broad end of this dimension are theories that apply to many diverse phenomena. At the narrow end of this dimension are theories that apply to a small number of closely related phenomena. As with informal and formal theories, both broad and narrow theories have their place in psychological research. Broad theories organize more phenomena, but tend to be less formal and less precise in their predictions. Narrow theories organize fewer phenomena, but tend to be more formal and more precise in their predictions. Functional theories explain psychological phenomena in terms of their function or purpose. Theories from the perspective of evolutionary psychology tend to be functional, assuming that human behavior has evolved to solve specific adaptive problems faced by our distant ancestors. Consider the phenomenon of sex differences in human mating strategies. Men are somewhat more likely than women to seek short-term partners and to value physical attractiveness over material resources in a mate. Women are somewhat more likely than men to seek long-term partners and to value material resources over physical attractiveness in a mate. And that's why I put this picture in here. He's looking at her butt. And I don't know if that's his wife or his girlfriend. But she's probably, if she's his girlfriend, she won't be anymore. Because he's seeking a short-term partner. That's why he looked. Or maybe he liked her shoes. Maybe he's looking at her shoes. That's got to be it. He's looking at her shoes. Mechanistic theories focus on specific variable structures and processes and how they interact to produce the phenomena. Researchers are currently constructing and testing theories that specify the brain structures associated with the storage and rehearsal of information in the short-term store, the transfer of information to the long-term store, and so on. Theories of psychological disorders are also increasingly likely to focus on biological mechanisms. Schizophrenia has been explained in terms of several biological theories, including theories that focus on genetics, neurotransmitters, brain structures, and even prenatal exposure to infections. And when I talk about schizophrenia, I talk about all of these theories. Is it possible that they are all correct? And the answer is yes. They could very easily they could all be correct. There may be different things that trigger schizophrenia. It can be dopamine, too many dopamine receptor sites. It could be the fact that all the people in your family are nuts. Could be the fact that, what is the brain structure? Oh, it's the pyramidal cells aren't aligned. And of course, one of the reasons they may not be aligned is because your mother had the flu in the second trimester of her pregnancy, when your brain was developing. Stage theories specify a series of stages that people pass through as they develop or adapt to their environment. And we go through these stage theories all the time. Freud had a stage theory. Erikson had a stage theory. Piaget had a stage theory. An example is Jean Piaget's famous theory of intellectual development, which specifies that children go through 4 distinct stages as they interact with the world: the sensory motor stage from 0 to 2, the pre-operational stage from 2 to 7, the concrete operational stage from 7 to 12, and the formal operational stage from 12 and up. Typology's theory categorizes people or behavior in distinct types. These include theories that identify several basic emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, surprise, anger, and disgust; several distinct types of intelligence: spatial intelligence, linguistic intelligence, mathematical, kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, and intrapersonal; and distinct types of personalities, types A and B. A type A personality is pushy, and a type B personality lets themselves be pushed. And who lives longer? Well, that's a good question. Usually type Bs live longer. Type As die of heart attacks. The primary way that scientific researchers use theories is by beginning with a set of phenomena and either constructing a theory to explain or interpret them, or choose an existing theory to work with. They then make a prediction about some new phenomena that should be observed if the theory is correct. This prediction is called a hypothesis. The researcher then conducts an empirical study to test the hypothesis. They reevaluate the theory in light of the new results and revise it if necessary. This process is usually conceptualized as a cycle because the researcher can then derive a new hypothesis from the revised theory, conducting a new empirical study to test the hypothesis, and so on. This is supposed to move too. Oh, doggone it. That baby's supposed to move. Wait a second. Shoot. Okay. That's the place babies gets up and starts walking. To construct a good theory, a researcher must know a detail about the phenomena of interest and about any existing theories based on a thorough review of the literature. The new theory must provide a coherent explanation or interpretation of the phenomena of interest and have some advantage over existing theories. It could be more formal and therefore more precise, broader in scope, more parsimonious, or it could take a new perspective or theoretical approach. If there is no existing theory, then almost any theory can be a step in the right direction. And that's what the baby's supposed to be doing, taking a step in the right direction. Formality, scope, and theoretical approach are determined in part by the nature of the phenomena to be interpreted. But the researcher's interests and abilities play a role too. Many theories in psychology are relatively informal, narrow in scope, and expressed in terms that even a beginning researcher can understand and even use to construct their own new theory. It is probably more common for a researcher to start with a theory that was originally constructed by someone else, giving due credit to the originator of the theory. Once they have identified an existing theory, they might derive a hypothesis from the theory and test it or modify the theory to account for some new phenomenon and then test the modified theory. A hypothesis is a prediction about a new phenomenon that should be observed if a particular theory is accurate. Theories and hypotheses always have this if-then relationship. Among the very best hypotheses are those that distinguish between competing theories. And the idea was it's one step after the other. No, this is if-then. No, I don't know. It made sense when I put it together. If a hypothesis is confirmed in a systematic empirical study, then the theory has been strengthened. Not only did the theory make an accurate prediction, but there is now a new phenomenon that the theory accounts for. If a hypothesis is disconfirmed in a systematic empirical study, then the theory has been weakened. It made an inaccurate prediction, and there is now a new phenomenon that it does not account for. Confirming a hypothesis can strengthen a theory, but it can never prove a theory. Scientists tend to avoid the word prove when talking and writing about theories. One reason for this is that there may be other plausible theories that imply the same hypothesis, which means that confirming the hypothesis strengthens all those theories equally. It is always possible that another test of the hypothesis or a test of the new hypothesis derived from the theory will be disconfirmed. This is a version of the famous philosophical problem of induction. One cannot definitely prove a general principle, all swans are white, just by observing confirming cases. For example, white swans, no matter how many there are. It is always possible that a disconfirming case, a black swan, will eventually come along. For these reasons, scientists tend to think of theories, even highly successful ones, as subject to revision based on new and unexpected observations. And this is an example of the problem of induction. But how can you know the sun will arise again in the morning? I can't. I just feel it that it will. It's almost always going to happen. It should always happen. But one of these days it may not happen. And that's the way scientists feel. That's why we can never say, we're sure this is going to happen. Disconfirming a hypothesis disproves the theory it was derived from. However, scientists do not give up on their theories so easily. One reason is that one disconfirmed hypothesis could be a fluke, or it could be the result of a faulty research design. Perhaps the researcher did not successfully manipulate the independent variable or measure the dependent variable. A disconfirmed hypothesis could also mean that some unstated but relatively minor assumption of the theory was not met. Researchers are not free to ignore disconfirmations of their theories. If they cannot improve the research design or modify their theories to account for repeated disconfirmations, then they eventually abandon their theories and replace them with ones that are more successful. Now you can understand why it is so important to tell people when things don't work. That way they don't do this over and over and over again, or that. Distinguish the phenomenon you are interested in from any theories of those phenomena. Beware especially the tendency to fuse a phenomenon to a common sense theory of it. If vague common sense explanations have been fused to the phenomenon, this gives the impression that the phenomenon has already been adequately explained and closes off further inquiry into precisely why or how it happens. Turn to research literature to identify existing theories of the phenomena that you're interested in. There will usually be more than one plausible theory. Existing theories may be complementary or competing, but it is essential to know that they are. If there are not existing theories, you should come up with 2 or 3 of your own, even if they are informal and limited in scope. Then get in the habit of describing the phenomenon you are interested in, followed by 2 or 3 best theories of it. Do this whether you're speaking or writing about your research. And this shows a literature review as a bunch of books. The reality is your literature review probably will be a bunch of journal articles. Books are old. Even the day they're printed, they're still old. It's all old ideas. Your textbook, it's an old idea. Sorry. And we could create a new textbook Well, in research methods, it wouldn't make any sense. But in abnormal psychology, in abnormal psychology, every time they come out with a new DSM, you have to change all the textbooks. It's kind of exciting. I have a textbook from the 1970s. Abnormal psychology book, nothing in it has anything to do with the textbook of today. You may be able to derive a hypothesis from one of the theories. At the very least, for each research question you generate, you should ask what each plausible theory implies about the answer to that question. If one of them implies a particular answer, then you may have an interesting hypothesis to test. When you write your research report or plan your presentation, be aware that there are two basic ways that researchers usually include theory. The first is to raise a research question, answer that question by conducting a new study, and then offer one or more theories, usually more, to explain or interpret the results. This format works well for applied research questions and for research questions that existing theories do not address. The second way is to describe one or more existing theories, derive a hypothesis from one of those theories, test the hypothesis in a new study, and finally reevaluate the theory. This format works well when there is an existing theory that addresses the research question, especially if the resulting hypothesis is surprising or conflicts with a hypothesis derived from a different theory. And that is the end of that. So what we're going to be doing in this class, one of the things we're going to be doing in this class, wait a minute, let me get rid of that. There we are. One of the things, you can see my hair is still all over the place. One of the things we're going to be doing in this class is coming up with a research proposal. In the future, we will try to figure out how in the world we're going to prove that your research proposal. Each of you gets to come up with one, and I will be talking to you, and as I answer your discussions, I will be talking to you as to how probable it is that it's going to work. Right now, I'm dropping a kidney stone. I don't know if you guys understand what kidney stones are. Renal calculi is what the medicine calls them. So I'm in a little bit of pain. Actually, in quite a bit of pain. But you get used to it after a while. Anyway, I will communicate with you next week. Something else that's happening this week is that 56 years ago, I ran a race for my college on the track team, and we set a record. And 56 years ago, it's been 56 years and nobody's broken the record yet. So they're going to have a dinner on Friday night. Not especially for me, it's just for people that ran track. So I'll tell you how that went. Okay. I'll probably make another one of these before I go for this week. So I'll talk to you later.